My name is John Hale, and I'm an independent investigator of unexplained historical events. For 23 years, I've documented cases that challenge our understanding of reality, from the Enfield poltergeist to the Amityville horror. I've spent my career separating documented fact from folklore, searching for truth in stories that most academics prefer to ignore. I came to Tennessee because the Bell Witch case represents something unique in American paranormal history. Unlike most ghost stories that rely on secondhand accounts and embellished retellings, this case comes with extraordinary documentation: court records, sworn testimonies, newspaper reports, and detailed journals, all describing 4 years of terror that gripped one family and an entire community between 1817 and 1821. What drew me here wasn't just the evidence, but its consistency. When dozens of witnesses, including ministers, doctors, and a future president, all describe the same impossible events, you have to ask, what really happened on that farm in Robertson County? Based on historical records and court documents, in 1804, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to Robertson County, Tennessee. Bell was a prosperous planter who purchased 328 acres of fertile bottomland along the Red River. The property records show he paid $3,200, a substantial sum that established him as one of the area's wealthier settlers. Bell built a 2-story log house with 4 rooms downstairs and sleeping quarters in the loft. He and his wife Lucy had 9 children, but it was their youngest daughter, Elizabeth, called Betsy, who would become the center of what was to come. The family attended Red River Baptist Church, where John served as an elder and magistrate. For 13 years, the Bells lived quietly. John expanded his holdings, planted cotton and corn, and established himself as a respected member of the community. Nothing in the historical record suggests anything unusual about the family until the summer of 1817. Reconstructed from John Bell's own written account in August 1817, John Bell was walking through his cornfield at dusk, inspecting his crop before harvest. The air was thick with humidity, and cicadas droned in the oak trees that bordered his property. According to Bell's testimony, recorded years later, he encountered an animal unlike anything he'd seen in his 60 years. The creature sat between the corn rows about 20 yards ahead, the body of a large dog, but with the head of a rabbit. Its ears were long and pointed. Its eyes reflected the dying sunlight like mirrors. Bell raised his rifle. The thing didn't move, just sat there watching him. When he fired, the animal simply vanished. Not ran away, vanished. Bell searched the area but found no blood, no tracks, nothing to indicate the creature had ever existed. What Bell couldn't have known, as he stood in that cornfield staring at empty ground, was that he had just encountered the first manifestation of something that would destroy his family's peace forever. That same evening, the knocking began. Based on testimony from multiple family members, the knocking started on the outside walls of the Bell house. Lucy Bell described it in her journal as deliberate and insistent, as if someone demanded entry. The family would rush outside to investigate, but found nothing. No footprints in the soft earth around the house, no signs of disturbance. Within a week, the sounds moved inside. The family reported scratching noises in the walls. Not the scrabbling of rodents, but something larger, more deliberate. It sounded, according to John Bell Jr.'s account, like claws raking against the wooden beams, as if something was trying to claw its way out. Picture the Bell family huddled in their main room, listening to something moving through the very structure of their home. The scratching would start in one wall, move overhead to the ceiling, then down the opposite wall, following a path that would be impossible for any earthly creature. The phenomena escalated quickly. Heavy objects could be heard being dragged across the floor of the attic at night. When family members climbed up to investigate, they found nothing out of place. No footprints disturbed the dust. No objects had been moved. But it was what happened to the bed covers that first truly terrified them. Documented in sworn testimony by Dr. George Hobson and Reverend James Gunn, night after night, the Bell children's bed covers would be slowly pulled away as they slept. Not yanked off dramatically, but drawn away gradually, deliberately. When they grabbed hold and pulled back, they could feel resistance on the other end. Something was pulling against them. Betsy Bell, then 12 years old, bore the worst of it. According to multiple witnesses, including the family doctor and several ministers, her long hair would be found tangled and knotted each morning, twisted into patterns that would have been impossible to create naturally or through self-infliction. Dr. George Hobson examined these knots and documented them in his medical notes, which survive in the Tennessee State Archives. He wrote, "The tangles were complex and tight, requiring scissors to remove. The pattern suggested systematic manipulation by external forces during the child's sleep. Imagine young Betsy waking in terror, her scalp burning from hair pulled so violently it lifted her partially from her pillow. Picture her mother Lucy, a devout woman who believed in the rational order of God's world, trying to untangle her daughter's hair while fighting her own rising panic. Then came the slapping. Based on eyewitness testimony from over 20 documented observers, the physical attacks on Betsy Bell were witnessed by dozens of people over several months. Reverend James Gunn of Red River Baptist Church testified, "I observed the child being struck repeatedly by an unseen force. The blows were audible throughout the room, and red handprints would appear on her face and arms before our eyes." Dr. Hobson's medical examination notes describe contusions and welts consistent with physical assault, appearing in patterns impossible for self-infliction. The marks were photographed in later years and showed distinct finger impressions, as if invisible hands had struck and grabbed the girl. The attacks followed no pattern the family could predict. Betsy might be sitting quietly at the dinner table when, crack, the sound of a slap would echo through the room and a red handprint would bloom across her cheek. She would cry out, more from shock than pain, while her family sat helpless to protect her from an assailant they couldn't see. Pins would appear embedded in Betsy's clothing and skin. When removed, they proved to be ordinary sewing pins, but their placement, deep in fabric, sometimes bent at impossible angles, defied explanation. The girl would be pinched and scratched by invisible fingers, leaving marks that Dr. Hobson documented and measured. But the family's ordeal was far from over. The entity, whatever it was just getting started. Documented progression recorded by John Bell Jr. and multiple witnesses shows that for months, the phenomena remained physical but silent. Then, in early 1818, something unprecedented occurred. The entity began to speak. The first vocalizations were barely audible whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls. Family members described straining to make out words, catching fragments of speech that made no sense. The voice was weak, distant, like someone calling from the bottom of a well. John Bell Jr. kept detailed notes of this progression, writing, "The voice grew stronger each day, becoming more distinct and clear. It was unmistakably female, educated in its speech, with an accent that suggested refinement rather than the rough dialect of our region." Imagine the family's terror as those first whispered words became clear. Picture them gathered in their parlor, lamplight flickering on the walls, when a woman's voice spoke from empty air. "I am a spirit. I was once very happy, but have been disturbed." When pressed to identify herself, the entity gave contradictory answers. Sometimes she claimed to be old Kate Batts, a neighbor who had feuded with John Bell over property boundaries. Other times, she said she was a spirit whose grave had been disturbed. The one constant was her obvious intelligence and her intimate knowledge of the Bell family's private affairs. She knew their secrets, their plans, their conversations held in supposed privacy. She would comment on discussions held when she wasn't present, reveal family matters known only to blood relatives, and demonstrate awareness of events happening far from the Bell property. Reverend Sugg Fort documented this phenomenon, writing, "The spirit possesses knowledge that no earthly being could acquire through natural means. She speaks of events in distant places as they occur and demonstrates familiarity with the family's most private matters." Witnessed and documented by Andrew Jackson's party and numerous other observers. As the entity's vocal abilities developed, so did her power to manipulate physical objects. What had begun with pulled bed covers escalated into full-scale defiance of natural law. Unlike typical poltergeist activity, where objects move when no one is watching, the Bell witch delighted in public demonstrations. She would announce her intentions. "Watch this," the voice would say, and witnesses would see a heavy wooden table rise inches off the floor and glide across the room. Kitchen implements developed their own malevolent life. Knives would fly across rooms and embed themselves in walls. The family's spinning wheel would operate by itself, thread drawing out smoothly as invisible hands worked the mechanism. Books would open to specific pages while the entity read passages aloud, often selecting biblical verses that seemed to mock the family's faith. Picture the Bell family and their guests, frozen in horror, as cutlery danced through the air around them. Imagine the sound of metal striking wood as knife after knife buried itself in the cabin walls, each throw precise and deliberate. But perhaps most unsettling were the entity's gifts. Fresh tropical fruit would appear in winter, exotic flowers unknown to Tennessee would materialize on tables, jewelry and trinkets would be found in family members' pockets. Items that proved real and solid, but whose origins remained mysterious. The voice would explain these manifestations with casual indifference. "I brought Lucy some oranges from the West Indies." Or, "I thought Betsy might enjoy these pins from New Orleans." When asked how she acquired such items, the entity would only laugh. A sound witnesses described as melodious yet deeply disturbing. Based on multiple witness accounts and physical evidence, the strange creature John Bell first encountered in his cornfield proved to be just the beginning. Witnesses reported seeing animals that defied natural classification throughout the Bell property. Rabbits the size of dogs, birds with impossible wingspans, cats that walked upright like humans. These manifestations left physical evidence. Tracks in mud that corresponded to no known animal, scratches on trees at heights no earthly creature could reach, disturbed vegetation marking paths through the woods. The Bell family's dogs reacted to these spectral creatures with extreme terror. Reverend Johnston, who spent several nights documenting the phenomena, wrote, "I observed what appeared to be a large black dog with features that seemed somehow wrong. Eyes too intelligent, movements too purposeful. When I approached, the creature became translucent and faded away entirely. Imagine walking the Bell property at night, following the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Your lantern reveals tracks in the soft earth, prints that look almost like a dog's, but with too many toes, pressed deeper than the weight of any normal animal could account for. Behind you, something howls, but the sound comes from directly overhead, impossible unless the creature making it could fly." The entity seemed to control these manifestations at will, producing animal sounds from empty rooms, howling, barking, the screech of birds of prey. The family would follow the sounds through their house, only to have the noises move to different rooms ahead of them. Documented in Jackson's own writings and multiple corroborating accounts, by 1819, news of the Bell which had reached Nashville and attracted the attention of Andrew Jackson, then a major general and hero of the War of 1812. Jackson had served with John Bell and was intrigued by reports of the haunting. Jackson's approach to the supernatural was characteristically direct. According to his own written account, he declared, "I'd rather face the entire British Army than deal with the Bell Witch, but I'll see what this spirit is made of." Jackson arrived with a party that included soldiers, investigators, and a local man who claimed to be a witch hunter. This individual boasted of possessing a silver bullet that could destroy any supernatural entity. Picture Jackson's confidence as his party approached the Bell property. Battle-hardened men who had faced British regulars at New Orleans, certain they could handle whatever rural superstition they might encounter. That confidence evaporated instantly. As documented by multiple witnesses, including Jackson himself, their horses suddenly stopped and refused to advance toward the Bell house. The wheels of their wagon appeared to be stuck, though the ground was level and firm. Then the voice spoke, clear as daylight though no one could be seen. "General Jackson, let your men try their silver bullet on me." What happened next was witnessed by Jackson's entire party. The self-proclaimed witch hunter began convulsing, claiming invisible hands were choking him. He was thrown from his horse and writhed on the ground, gasping and clawing at his throat. The attack continued for several minutes before the voice spoke again. "He won't trouble me anymore. You can proceed, General." Immediately, the horses could move and the wagon wheels turned freely. Jackson's party continued to the Bell house, where they spent one night witnessing the full range of phenomena: voices, moving objects, and attacks on Betsy. Jackson had planned to stay a week. He and his men left the next morning. Later, Jackson told friends he would rather fight the British Empire than spend another night with the Bell Witch. Based on contemporary newspapers, letters, and documented discussions, as news of the haunting spread throughout Tennessee, various explanations emerged that reflected the scientific understanding and cultural beliefs of the 1820s. Many locals believed they were witnessing the revenge of Kate Batts, the eccentric neighbor who had feuded with John Bell over property boundaries. Court records show Batts had lost a lawsuit to Bell and was rumored to practice folk magic. She had allegedly cursed Bell, saying, "I'll haunt you and yours until the day you die." The fact that the entity sometimes identified herself as Old Kate supported this theory. Kate Batts was a real person, a woman described in contemporary accounts as strange and possibly mentally unbalanced. Picture her as she might have appeared in court, facing John Bell across a room full of men who held her in suspicion and contempt. Did her rage at losing the lawsuit somehow manifest as supernatural revenge? Religious leaders offered different interpretations. Some saw divine punishment for unknown sins, others the work of Satan testing a righteous family. Reverend James Gunn wrote, "Whether this manifestation comes from heaven or hell, it serves to remind us that forces beyond our comprehension are at work in this world." A few skeptics suggested an elaborate hoax by the Bell family themselves. However, this theory struggled to explain the numerous independent witnesses, the consistent phenomena over 4 years, and the fact that the haunting brought the family social ostracism rather than benefit. Dr. Charles Bell, John's brother and a physician, proposed what might be considered an early psychological explanation. He theorized that young Betsy unconsciously produced the phenomena through unknown mental powers, triggered by adolescent stress. Modern investigators have suggested this represents an early description of what would later be termed psychokinetic or poltergeist activity. But even the psychological theory raises disturbing questions. If a 12-year-old girl could unconsciously manipulate physical objects, produce voices, and create complex manifestations witnessed by dozens of people simultaneously, what does that say about the nature of human consciousness and its relationship to physical reality? Documented in death certificate, autopsy reports, and eyewitness testimony, by 1820, the entity's particular hatred for John Bell had become unmistakable. She cursed him by name, calling him Old Jack Bell, and promising to torment him to his grave. Bell's health deteriorated rapidly through the year. Dr. Hobson documented episodes of facial paralysis that came without warning. Bell's mouth would twist unnaturally, his speech would slur, and he would have difficulty swallowing. These attacks left him weakened and confused. The entity took credit for Bell's condition, taunting him during his episodes. "How are you feeling now, Old Jack? I'm going to kill you eventually." Picture John Bell, once a strong and prosperous man, reduced to a trembling invalid while an invisible tormentor laughed at his suffering. Imagine his family watching helplessly as he wasted away, knowing their supernatural enemy was slowly destroying him. On December 19, 1820, Bell was found unconscious in his bed. Dr. Hobson was summoned but could do nothing. Bell never regained consciousness, dying the following day. Immediately after Bell's death, the family discovered a small vial of dark liquid in his medicine cabinet, a vial no one recognized and that had not been there before. When questioned, the entity's laughter filled the house. "I gave Old Jack a dose of that last night, which finished him. To test the substance, they gave drops to the family cat. The animal convulsed and died within minutes. They threw the vial into the fireplace, where it exploded with a bright blue flame." At John Bell's funeral, witnessed by dozens of mourners, the entity's laughter echoed through the cemetery. Reverend Sugg Fort later wrote, "I have presided over many burials, but never experienced anything as disturbing as invisible laughter at a graveside." Based on family testimony and contemporary records, after John Bell's death, the phenomena began to diminish. The entity's attacks on Betsy became less frequent, the physical manifestations less dramatic. In early 1821, she announced her departure. "I am going away now," the voice told the family, "but I will return in 7 years." The manifestations gradually faded until the Bell house fell silent. The family attempted to rebuild their lives, though the trauma left permanent scars. Betsy never married her childhood sweetheart, Joshua Gardner, eventually wedding Richard Powell, a former schoolteacher who had witnessed many of the phenomena. True to her word, the entity returned exactly 7 years later in 1828. The second manifestation was briefer and less intense. Consisting mainly of conversations with John Bell Jr., the entity made predictions about future events. The Civil War, political changes, many of which later proved accurate. Before departing again, she made a final promise. I will return in 107 years to the descendants of John Bell. The year 1935 came and went without reported incidents, though some claim strange occurrences continued to plague Bell descendants in various parts of the country. Assessment of surviving historical documentation shows what distinguishes the Bell Witch case from typical ghost stories is the extraordinary amount of contemporary documentation. The evidence includes detailed journals kept by John Bell Jr. and other family members, official statements by Andrew Jackson and his party, medical examination reports by Dr. George Hobson, sworn testimonies by multiple ministers and community leaders, newspaper reports from the Nashville Whig and other publications, and court documents related to the Bell-Batts property dispute. These records, housed in Tennessee State Archives, present a consistent account verified by dozens of educated, credible witnesses. Significantly, none of these witnesses ever recanted their testimony, even years later when the notoriety might have encouraged them to claim deception or mistake. The witnesses included people with everything to lose by associating themselves with such bizarre claims. Ministers who risked their congregation's trust, doctors who risked their professional reputations, political leaders who risked their careers. All went on record describing events they knew would sound impossible to future generations. Investigators' assessment based on 23 years of research shows that standing in what remains of the Bell property today, I'm struck by how the basic questions remain unanswered after 2 centuries. If the phenomena were genuine, what was the intelligence that called itself the Bell Witch? If they were not, how do we explain the consistency of witness testimony across social classes, professions, and belief systems? The psychological explanation, that Betsy Bell unconsciously produced the phenomena, requires us to accept that human consciousness possesses powers we don't yet understand. The hoax theory demands we believe that an entire community, including skeptical investigators, was fooled for 4 years by an elaborate deception that left no evidence of its methods. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that the Bell Witch represents something we have no framework to understand, a form of consciousness or intelligence that exists outside our current scientific paradigms. The case challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of reality. It forces us to confront the possibility that there are aspects of existence that our instruments cannot measure and our theories cannot explain. Final assessment shows I came to Tennessee seeking answers about one of America's most documented supernatural cases. I've examined the evidence, interviewed descendants, walked the grounds where it all occurred. I've applied the same rigorous methodology I've used in dozens of other investigations. What I've found is a mystery that has only deepened with investigation. The historical record is too detailed, too consistent, and too well documented to dismiss as folklore. The witnesses were too numerous, too credible, and too diverse to suggest mass deception. Yet the events they describe challenge everything we think we know about the laws of physics and the nature of consciousness. The Bell family took their truth to their graves. The entity that terrorized them has remained silent for 2 centuries. All we have are the testimonies of long-dead witnesses and the echo of events that may have been impossible, or may have revealed possibilities we're not yet ready to accept. But I want you to consider this. If the same phenomena occurred today, if a family reported 4 years of documented supernatural activity witnessed by dozens of credible observers, would we believe them? Or would we find ways to dismiss their testimony, regardless of the evidence, because accepting it would force us to reconsider our understanding of reality itself? The Bell Witch case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the universe may be far stranger than we're prepared to admit, that consciousness, reality, and the relationship between them may be more complex than our current science can grasp. So I leave you with the question that has haunted investigators for 200 years, the question that brought me to this place and continues to disturb my sleep. What if every word of their testimony was true?